All right, so Central Asia. When you hear that, what comes to mind? I'm betting it's probably the Silk Road.
Yeah, the Silk Road, definitely. Connecting East and West. I mean, talk about a crossroads for
Oh,
cultural.
for sure. And all that trade, too. It must have been bustling. But it makes you think about the religions, too, right?
Yeah, totally.
Like beyond just the ones everyone's heard of. I mean, there must have been so many different paths taking root there.
Such a good point. It's so easy to just lump Central Asia all together, you know?
Oh, yeah.
But when you really look at it, there's just this incredible mix of spiritual traditions.
So true. Some are really well known, obviously, but then there are the ones that are more hidden.
Right, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're diving into one of those more hidden threads.
Exactly. We're focusing on the Ismailis in Central Asia. This is a history that a lot of people might not be too familiar with.
Yeah, and it's a really fascinating story.
To help guide us on this journey, we're turning to a pretty amazing resource. It's called Central Asian Ismailis, an annotated bibliography.
Yes, a really fantastic resource.
And it's from the Institute of Ismaili Studies. They do a lot of great scholarship on Islam.
And I think what's really neat about this bibliography is that it shows you how dedicated people are to really understanding Islam.
Right.
Not just as like doctrines and stuff, but as a living faith, you know, like how it's woven into the societies and cultures where it took root.
I like that. It's definitely been shaped by history, and it's shaped history too.
Exactly, a two-way street.
Okay, so before we go any further, let's get our bearings straight. When we say Central Asia, we're talking about the western part.
Right, the part that's more Turco-Iranian. You know, historically, this was a land of all these different Iranic peoples.
Okay.
But over time, there was a lot of what we call Turkicization. That's when Turkic groups started migrating in and blending with the existing cultures.
So they kind of adopted parts of Iranian culture while bringing their own influences.
Exactly. It was a big cultural mix.
Makes sense. And I think we need to talk about Badakhshan and the Pamir too.
Oh, yeah. That's a crucial region for our story. This area goes way back, you know, to ancient times. It's actually spread across a few modern countries now. You've got parts in Afghanistan, Tajikistan, China, even Pakistan.
So it's kind of right in the middle of everything?
Yeah, it's a real melting pot. All sorts of languages, ethnicities, and religions. You've got a lot of diversity there.
And I've noticed that the term Pamiri comes up a lot when you're reading about this region.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting one. It can be a bit tricky. You see it a lot in research, especially from Russia and the Soviet era. It's become like a common way to refer to the Tajik people of Gorno-Badakhshan in Tajikistan. These are the folks who speak East Iranian languages like Shuni, Rishani, Waki, but it can be a little oversimplified.
Oh, how so?
Well, a lot of the people who are labeled Pamiri actually see themselves primarily as Tajik, or they identify more with their specific local group.
I see. So Pamiri doesn't always capture the whole picture.
Right. It's a term that kind of mixes up language, region, and religious identity, especially since it's often used as a quick way to refer to the Ismaili communities there.
Which is what we're focusing on, right?
Exactly. For this deep dive, we're really zeroing in on the history of the Ismailis in this specific area of Badakhshan and the Pamir.
Okay, that makes sense. So what are we hoping to accomplish with this deep dive?
Well, there's a lot to uncover. First, we want to trace how the Ismaili faith actually spread into Central Asia.
Right, like how did it get there?
Then we need to look at all the challenges they've faced throughout history, because it hasn't been easy.
Yeah, I bet there were some tough times.
Oh, definitely. But then we also want to shine a light on their achievements, all the incredible things they've accomplished and contributed to the region.
Right, and their legacy, like what's their impact been? It's a story of resilience, you know, intellectual vibrancy, and these really deep historical roots.
And it's a story that shows just how interconnected faith, culture, and the land itself really are. To understand the Ismailis of Central Asia, you can't separate them from the historical currents and the geography that shaped their faith. It all ties together.
That's a great point. So let's get into it. How did this all begin? How did the Ismaili faith first spread into Central Asia?
So our source talks about the Ismaili Dawa. You can think of it as like an organized effort to share their understanding of the faith.
Okay.
And this Dawa, it reached all sorts of places, Kerman, Sistan, Multan, Khwarizm. But there was a specific period that was really key, the Samanid epoch.
When was that?
That was back in the 9th and 10th centuries.
Got it.
And what's interesting is that the Samanids, they were all about trade and commerce. thanks in large part to that Silk Road we were talking about.
Right, they were in a prime spot for it.
Exactly. And that created this atmosphere where ideas could travel just as easily as goods. So you have all these different cultures and religions mixing and spreading, including Ismailism.
It's like the Silk Road wasn't just for silk.
Exactly. It was a highway for ideas, too. And you had these big cities popping up like Bukhara and Samarkand.
Like cultural hubs.
Totally. They were centers of intellectual and cultural life, and the Persian language started to become more widely used. It spread out from these centers, reaching into places like Badakhshan.
Oh, so Badakhshan was right in the path of all these developments.
Exactly. It was sandwiched between these major cultural hubs, so it was bound to be influenced. But not everyone was thrilled about this spread of Ismailism.
I was going to ask about that. Like, was there any pushback?
Oh, yeah. There was definitely some resistance. The Sunni establishment, they weren't too happy about it, and neither were the Ghaznavids who came to power later.
Why not? What was the problem?
Well, for one thing, these Ismailis, they pledged allegiance to the Fatimid Caliphate over in Egypt. That was a big deal.
Like they recognized the Fatimids as their spiritual leaders.
Exactly, instead of the Abbasid Caliph who was more associated with Sunni Islam.
So it was a challenge to the established power structure.
Definitely. And all this pressure, it actually ended up shaping where the Ismailis could really flourish.
Maybe they couldn't just practice openly wherever they wanted?
It wasn't that simple. The source actually points out how the mountains and the harsh conditions of Badakhshan became a kind of safe haven.
Oh, interesting. So it was like a refuge from persecution.
Exactly, especially during that Samanid period. It's amazing how geography can play such a huge role in religious history.
For sure. Like the mountains almost protected them in a way.
Right. It was hard to get to them and control them in that kind of terrain. Though scholars still debate when exactly Ismaili teachings first made it to Badakhshan.
Oh, yeah. What are the different theories?
Some think it might have been even before the Samanids, maybe through more informal channels, but others say it was during the Samanid era when the Dakas were more active. It's still kind of a mystery.
So we're not exactly sure when it all started.
Not with complete certainty, but we do know that one figure becomes really important in the story of Central Asian Ismailis, Nasir-i Khusraw.
I've heard that name. He was a big deal, right?
Oh yeah, he's considered crucial for reviving the Ismaili Dawa in Khorasan after the Samanids declined. And his life story is incredible.
Oh, really? Tell me more.
So he was born in Quvadian, which is modern-day Tajikistan, and he was way more than just a Dai. He was a poet, a traveler, a real philosopher.
Wow, a true Renaissance man.
Exactly. He even went on a pilgrimage to Cairo, which was the heart of the Fatimid world. Seems like he went through a pretty big spiritual transformation, which led him to embrace Ismailism.
So he wasn't always an Ismaili?
It looks like he might have been a Twelver Shi before.
Interesting. So what happened next?
Well, he ended up settling in Yumgan in Badakhshan.
And that's where he really made his mark.
Absolutely. During his exile there, he wrote a ton of important works, like philosophical and theological treatises, things like Gushayishfa, Rahayish Kwan, Ali Kwan Zada Musafirin.
Yeah.
Really significant stuff.
And those helped spread Ismaili ideas in Badakhshan.
They were key. They helped people understand Ismaili interpretations of Shi Islam. But there's something to keep in mind.
What's that?
These writings, they were pretty complex.
Well, like not exactly light reading.
Right. They were mainly understood by the more educated folks in the community, people who later became known as pirs and khalifas.
Okay.
And those pirs and khalifas, they had a big job. They interpreted these ideas for the wider community, the mustajibs. But Nasir-i Khusraw himself, he dedicated his whole life to the Ismaili Dawa and really worked hard to spread the faith.
And he clearly left a lasting legacy. His tomb is a major pilgrimage site, right?
Absolutely. Yumgan became a really important place for the Ismailis, and over time, all these legends and stories sprang up around him, tales of miracles and extraordinary feats.
He became almost mythical.
It happens a lot with these important religious figures. Their stories become part of the community's identity and beliefs.
That makes sense. It's how they're remembered.
Right, and these oral traditions are really valuable for understanding Ismailism in Badakhshan, especially since there aren't that many written records from before the 19th century.
So these stories are a window into how the community saw Nasir-i Khusraw and how much he influenced them.
Exactly. You can see his impact on their whole understanding of their faith. And even the Nasir-i Ismailis over in Iran, they probably would have known about him too. Which is saying something because they had their own rich intellectual traditions.
So even across different branches of Ismailism, he was a well-known figure.
It seems that way. His influence was pretty far-reaching.
But the Ismailis weren't just dealing with external pressures and challenges. They had some internal developments too, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's a big shift in 1094. The Fatimid Imam Caliph al-Mustansir passed away, and that led to a major split in the community.
What kind of split?
They divided into two branches, the Nazaris and the Mustalis.
So it was a succession crisis, like who would be the next leader?
Exactly, and it had lasting repercussions. But interestingly enough, our source says we don't have a lot of specifics about what was happening in Badakhshan during this time.
Oh, really? So it's a bit of a blank spot in the historical record?
Kind of, but the oral tradition suggests that the Ismailis in Badakhshan, they stuck with Nasir-i Khusraw's teachings, at least until they connected with the Nasir-i Ismailis later on.
During the Alamut period.
Right.
Can you remind me what that was all about again?
Oh, sure. The Alamut period refers to the Nasir-i Ismaili state. It was centered at the fortress of Alamut in Persia.
Okay.
And our source mentions some interesting connections between Alamut and Badakhshan. For example, they found texts like the Haft Babi Sayyidna in Badakhshan. It's thought to be the work of Hassani Mahmudi Khatib.
Who was that?
He was a really important figure for the Nazaris. And there's also a story about Sheikh Zayed visiting the Alamut court.
So there was definitely some interaction between them.
It seems so. We're not totally sure about the exact nature of their relationship, but there were definitely some links.
And more recent research has actually shed more light on that Haftbab text.
Right. It's fascinating. They've found stronger evidence connecting it to Hassani Mahmudi Khatib, and it gives us a better understanding of Nizari teachings after they declared Qiyamah in 1164.
What does Qiyamah mean?
It means resurrection. It was a big turning point for them. And the fact that these texts were in Badakhshan hints at an intellectual exchange between the two branches.
And so they weren't totally isolated from each other.
No, definitely not. But then things took another big turn. In 1256, Alamut fell.
Oh yeah, that was a major event.
It was a huge blow to the Nazaris, and it led to Ismaili communities being scattered all over the place.
So they were forced to disperse.
Yeah, it was a really tough time, and our source says that the period after Alamut is one of the least documented in Ismaili history.
Really? We just don't know much about what happened to them.
There's a lot we're still trying to piece together, but we do know that the Ismailis didn't just disappear. Some historians at the time tried to say they were completely gone, but they were wrong.
So they went underground in a way.
In a sense. They became more dispersed, living on the edges of bigger Muslim states. And Badakhshan, with its remoteness and mountains, it became one of those places where they could hold on.
So that isolation actually helped them survive.
It gave them a chance to keep their traditions alive. And this period also saw them adopting taqiyya more widely.
What's taqiyya?
It's the practice of concealing your religious beliefs when you're in danger.
Oh, like to protect themselves.
Exactly. It was a way to survive when they were being persecuted.
Makes sense. But what about the political situation in Badakhshan after Alamut fell? Who was in charge?
It was pretty messy, actually. All these local rulers were vying for power. You had Tajik, Turkic, and Afghan mirs and beks. A real mix.
So no central authority?
Not really. It was fragmented.
Yeah.
But our source mentions that the Yarid rulers who weren't friendly to the Ismailis, they started to lose power in the 18th century.
Oh, so things shifted a bit.
Yeah, it seems like there was a change in the local power dynamics. But the 19th century brought a whole new set of problems. Like in 1829, you had the Uzbek Khan Murad Beg of Kunduz invading.
And what happened then?
It was brutal. He launched these slave raids, specifically targeting the Ismailis. It forced a lot of them to flee to even more remote areas just to survive.
Oh, wow. That's terrible.
It was a really dark chapter, and it's a reminder of how vulnerable the Ismailis were. But ironically, those communities that were already isolated in places like Wakhan, Shunan, Darvaz, they were actually better off in a way.
Really? How so?
Because they were so hard to reach, it was tougher for outsiders to interfere with them, so their beliefs were actually more protected. But then the Pamir region got incorporated into the Bukharan Emirate, and that brought a new wave of persecution.
What was so bad about the Bukharan Emirate?
Well, the authorities there, they saw the Ismailis as infidels. They were incredibly hostile towards them and treated them horrifically. It got so bad that the Ismailis actually started reaching out to the Russians.
The Russians?
Yeah, the Russian Empire was expanding at the time, and the Ismailis were hoping they could get some protection from the Bukharans.
So they were caught between these different powers.
Exactly. They had to navigate this really complex geopolitical situation just to survive. And then came the Soviet era.
And that brought its own set of challenges for religious groups.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely. The Soviets, they put a lot of restrictions on religious life. It wasn't easy for the Ismailis to practice openly.
I can imagine.
But Badakhshan did see some improvements under Soviet rule, like in education and healthcare.
So it was a mixed bag.
Yeah, it was a complicated time. On the one hand, there were these positive developments, but on the other hand, they were facing limitations on their faith. And there was also the collectivization of agriculture and forced migrations. That had a huge impact on the Ismailis, just like it did on other groups in the Soviet Union.
So they were definitely going through a lot of upheaval.
Definitely. But despite all these challenges over centuries, the resilience of the Ismaili community in Central Asia is amazing.
It's incredible that they managed to hold on to their faith and traditions through all that.
It speaks to how strong their communities are and how deeply rooted their beliefs are. But they didn't just survive. They also made some significant intellectual and cultural contributions.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, for one, they were early adopters of Persian for their philosophical and scientific writings, even before Nasir-i Khusraw in some cases.
So they were embracing reason and scholarship.
Absolutely. It shows a real commitment to intellectual inquiry within their tradition. And it's interesting because at that time, a lot of other intellectual centers were focused on Arabic.
Right. Arabic was the dominant language of scholarship in a lot of places.
Exactly. But the Ismailis in Central Asia, they embraced Persian, and that helped foster a unique kind of philosophical and scientific discourse.
Like they were shaping the intellectual landscape of their region.
Exactly. And figures like Nasir-i Khusraw, they're prime examples of that dynamism. They made huge contributions to both literature and philosophy in Persian.
It's like they were pioneers in a way.
You could say that. And our source even points out that Soviet scholars themselves recognized the Ismailis for this. They acknowledged that the Ismailis were among the first in Islamic history to use Persian for these kinds of works.
So even scholars who weren't necessarily sympathetic to religion could see the impact they were having.
They couldn't ignore it. And let's not forget the pirs. They were the religious and community leaders, especially after Alamut. They played a crucial role in holding the community together.
How so?
Well, when you have periods of isolation and it's hard to communicate with the Ismaili imam, those pirs become essential. They're the ones interpreting the doctrines, providing spiritual guidance, and keeping the community strong.
It's like they were the glue holding everything together.
Exactly. And they still exist today, but their role has changed a bit over time, especially with modern communication and the way the Ismaili Imam is structured now.
So they're more integrated into a larger system.
Yeah, exactly. But it's interesting because despite all those periods of isolation, the Ismailis did manage to reconnect with the imams.
Oh, really? When was that?
From the 17th to the 19th centuries, they were exchanging farmans with the imams in Persia and India.
What are farmans?
They're like religious decrees.
So even though they were far apart geographically, they still maintained that spiritual connection.
They did. It's pretty remarkable. And it seems like things started to open up a bit more in Badakhshan from the mid-18th century to the early 20th century.
Like there was more freedom to practice their faith.
Yeah, it was a more stable period, and they were able to be more open about their beliefs.
That's great to hear. It's amazing how much they went through.
Yeah.
But their story hasn't just been told by the community itself, right? There's been a lot of academic interest in their history, too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. A whole bunch of scholars have been studying them. You have Russian scholars, Soviet scholars, post-Soviet scholars. It's a big field of study.
And who are some of the key figures?
Well, you've got people like Bobrinskoy, Semenov, Andreev, Bertels. They've all done some really important work. They collected manuscripts, studied the culture, and really helped us understand the Ismailis better.
So they were dedicated to preserving and studying this history.
They were, but we do have to acknowledge that sometimes their work was influenced by the political climate, especially during the Soviet era.
Right. The Soviets weren't exactly known for being neutral when it came to religion.
Yeah, their views definitely shaped how they interpreted things. But even so, these scholars, they made a huge contribution, especially all of those manuscripts they found. They've really enriched our understanding.
It's like they opened up a whole new world for us.
Exactly.
And so now today, the Ismaili community in Tajikistan is still one of the largest and oldest in the world.
It's true. They have a really deep history there. And there's been some amazing recent developments, too, like the opening of the Ismaili Center in Dushanbe.
I've heard about that. It's a beautiful building.
It is. And it was inaugurated by His Highness the Aga Khan IV and the president of Tajikistan. It's a real symbol of how integrated the community is within the nation.
It's a sign of acceptance and recognition.
Definitely. And then there's the University of Central Asia, or UCA.
Tell me about that.
It's a really innovative institution with campuses in Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. They're all about promoting development and progress in the region with a special focus on mountain societies.
So they're tackling some unique challenges.
They are, and the Aga Khan Development Network, or AKBN, has been incredibly active in the region, too.
They do a lot of great work all over the world.
They do, and they've been especially crucial in supporting the Pamiri people after the collapse of the Soviet Union. They're involved in all sorts of projects, social, economic, cultural.
So they're helping to rebuild and empower communities.
Exactly.
It's amazing to see how much the Ismailis have accomplished and how they've thrived in Central Asia despite all the obstacles.
It really is a testament to their spirit.
It's been a fascinating deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's a story that's full of twists and turns.
And I think for me, the most striking thing is just how much the geography of Badakhshan played a role. It was like a shield protecting them during those difficult times.
That's a really good point. And then you have figures like Nasir-i Khusraw, who left such a lasting intellectual legacy. His impact is still felt today.
And the resilience of the community itself. They faced persecution, isolation, political upheaval, and yet they never gave up. They held on to their beliefs, and they contributed so much to the region.
It's an inspiring story.
It really is. So for our listeners out there, what resonates with you the most about this history? Maybe it's thinking about how Ismaili identity is evolving in Central Asia today, in a world that's constantly changing.
Or maybe it's the way modern communication has impacted this community that was historically so spread out. Or perhaps it's those legends and stories that surround figures like Nasir-i Khusraw. There's so much to think about.
Exactly. So we'll leave you with this final thought. The story of the Ismailis in Central Asia is a reminder that faith, culture, geography, and power, they're all intertwined. It's a story of the human spirit's ability to endure and adapt, and it highlights the importance of understanding the diverse religious landscapes that have shaped our world.
And continue to shape it even today. It's a history that deserves to be remembered and appreciated.